I'm gonna say it. Most student films suck. And maybe my new short film, Are You Okay?, is no exception. But for now, I'm actually really proud of it. We had limited resources for set design, outfits, and lighting. Because of that, the entire vibe of the film rested on one thing: the color grade. The film is linked below. Feel free to watch and let me know if it actually does suck. First up, color management. I went with node-based color management. If you don't know what that is, there are plenty of pros on YouTube who explain it way better than I can. I'm using Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate as our project color space and Rec 79 Scene as the output. The film is 4:3, and the LUT is applied in tetrahedral, which is basically just better LUT math. I don't know. There are basically 3, maybe 4 scenes in 2 locations. My ultimate goal is to give it that 16mm film taste. Not too stylized, but introducing a lot of character into the color. Step 1 is always to group your clips. This is the first dialogue scene, filmed outdoors with literally just one reflector to give them some levels. Since we shot on the OG Ursa Mini Pro in Blackmagic RAW, I had a lot of latitude to play with. Step 2 is having a fixed node tree. It gives you speed because you know exactly where things are and lets you ripple changes in a node across the whole group. Here's a quick walkthrough. CST takes us from Gen 5 Blackmagic to Davinci Wide Gamut, then a linear node for exposure adjustments and balancing, but I only use it for exposure. Parallel nodes for HDR and highlight recovery if I need it, and then preset power windows laid out in parallel. A balance node where I do my color balance and contrast, maybe saturation, and finally a super useful hue, saturation, and density DCTL by mononodes, and a skin qualifier I sometimes use. By the way, this node tree is heavily inspired by Matt Mahoney, an awesome colorist here on YouTube. Check him out. Most of the shot matching is done in the linear and balance nodes. I could balance in the linear node, but I just want to do it in a balance node and use offset instead of photometric linear adjustments. I just find it to be working better on my panel. After shot matching everything in the linear and balance nodes, we can get into the exciting part: creating the look. This happens at the post-group level, so it applies globally across the entire group. The core look lives in these 4 nodes. First is Genesis, laid out at the end of the node tree. This is a very, very good film emulation plugin by Cullen Kelly. However, you can get 90% of this look from the built-in Kodak 2383 LUT that Davinci Resolve has. But I was lucky enough to borrow a spare seat from a friend of mine for this plugin, and it's absolutely amazing. I chose the trusty Vision 3 500T film stock and the usual 2383 color print. I wanted a soft contrast look, so I adjusted the push-pull slider, which is basically the film contrast slider, down so that I can get that soft contrast. Then I pumped up the interlayer effect for that film saturation. Then we have the neutral net curve, which is basically how much split tone we have in the image, and I parked that around the middle. And then I pushed the printer points a bit warm because I want this particular scene to have a warm, inviting, and soft look. And then of course, I turn on elation, which is set to the 16mm preset, and the grain, which is set to the 35mm preset. Next is the saturation, density, and hue DCTL from mononodes. You can do this obviously with the native hue curves, but having slider control is really clutch. I made slight adjustments to reds and yellows, and I wanted that thick saturation, so I boosted the global sat. But that made the colors too dark, especially with the density that's built into Genesis film emulation. Now this DCTL has a separate density adjustment to knock that back, so I pulled that density a little bit back to give a little bit more life into the colors. Thing is, you can do pretty much the exact same thing in the color slice tool because it has both saturation control as well as density control. Now next is the elusive 2-strip node. What the hell is 2-strip? Back in the physical film days, it was a process that splits the image into 2 tones. I use it to accentuate the teal and orange split tone look. Now you can do this natively. Frenchie color grading, she has a perfect video on it, and I'm heavily inspired by that video to implement that into this film. However, I already have the lab DCTL from Mononote, and in this DCTL, there is a dedicated slider for the 2-strip look. I push it to the max, then you get this very stylized type of look, which is cool in certain movies, but it's not the vibe that I'm going for. I rotated the hue to align with the skin tone and teal vectors, and then I reduced the key output so that the effect wasn't too overpowering. This just basically compressed the colors into that teal and orange palette just a little bit more. And then finally, we have the effects compound node. This compound node emulates film flickers, glow, lens distortion, and blur. I basically did this manually with a mix of Fusion and certain plugins and all that. However, you can get the same effects with the Film Look Creator. You can get the flicker, the glow, and the blur from Film Look Creator, and then you can use a separate node for the lens distortion effect. And voila, we have the look. At this point, I'll come back to the clips level and make adjustments to the power windows, and I'll dive into this a little bit later. But hold on, this scene is warm, and our latest scenes are cold and blue, at least that was my intentions. How do I keep it visually consistent, but also following my vision to have a warm scene and a cold blue scene and to have that color contrast within the film? For the indoor scene, I followed basically the same process. I grouped the shots and I matched them using my fixed node tree, and then I copy over the post-group look from the outdoor scene into this scene. The only difference is that I moved the printer lights in Genesis to make it cooler instead of warm, then balance the saturation and contrast. Once again, this printer lights thing, you can do it with the offset wheel as well. Lastly, because lighting isn't completely in our control, power windows are lifesavers by directing the audience's eye. Here's my preset power windows nodes set up in parallel. I don't use all of them every time, but they're there if I need them, especially the oval power windows. I use them the most because I feel that they are the most natural to work with. Just look at what a difference this makes in these shots. And there you go. With the minimal lighting that we had and the minimal set design and resources that we had access to, I think my vision for the look of the film really came together in the color grade. So let me know what you think of the grade down in the comments, and go watch the film if you want to judge me really, really hard. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.